Welcome, everyone. We are less than 24 hours away from the big showdown. Errol Spence, Terence Crawford. It seems surreal that we finally gotten to this point, but we have made it. And very shortly, we're going to see both of them in the ring for what guarantees to be an epic battle. Now, of course, in the build-up, all of us have given our predictions. We've argued online. We flip-flopped on our picks. I include myself in that bunch, but I've made this video to finally put down for posterity what my prediction for this fight is going to be. So come Sunday morning, you're either going to be coming back to this video calling me a genius, or you're going to be coming back clowning that I got it completely wrong. So I am going to be going with Terence Crawford by late stoppage. I wanted to wait until we got the weigh-in to make that final pick. Got the weigh-in, so I'm going to give you three reasons why I'm going to be leaning towards Crawford. So first things first, looking at the weigh-in, I was very happy to see both of them hydrated very well. Early on in the week, both of them just looked hungry. They look like zombies about to turn, honestly. Both were very ornery. Both, we know, probably has a little bit of struggles with the weight, especially being older. There was speculation about Crawford struggling a little bit more to make weight. That was unsubstantiated. I don't believe that was true. Spence is going on record stating that, this has been rough and that, the fight happens again with the rematch is going to be at 154. So, and he's been at 147 his entire career, amazingly. So with the weigh-in, I noticed that the way they both rehydrated, there was not a big uh weight difference. We've all been going into this fight talking about Earl's the bigger man. He's naturally the welterweight, but I think that's out the window now. I think the fact that Crawford has been at this weight for a couple years now, I think he's completely settled in, and I think he's a full-fledged welterweight. When you look at both of them side by side, their frames are mirroring each other. Even Crawford looks a little bit thicker around the waist. So for my first point, I honestly believe that Spence is not going to be the physically stronger man in the ring, and I'm talking about functional strength. A good example that we can look at is a common opponent that they had in Sean Porter. Now we know Sean is very strong. He actually started his career above middleweight, actually, and he's been, because of his height, he's made sure to kind of boil himself back down to compete at welterweight and have that big size advantage, which he's had. But if you notice in the fight with Spence, neither of them could completely physically dominate each other. You've seen instances where Porter was able to push Spence back a little bit, but then you've also seen uh, uh, instances in that fight where Spence has been able to push Porter back a little bit. So they were kind of even with their strength for the most part. But if you look at when Porter fought Crawford, there were times in that fight where Crawford was able to completely shove him off or completely just grab him and push him back into the ropes. So to me, Crawford has that functional strength. I know some people tie that into the wrestling, but I just think he's a very physically strong man, which is underestimated because he's so wiry. But I think in the ring, it might surprise people that Spence is probably not going to be able to physically dominate and push around Crawford like he's been able to do with so many of his other opponents. So, from our first point, I don't think that Spence is really going to have a physical strength advantage in this fight, which he's been used to for most of his career. The second point is one other thing I noticed with Spence. It's not so much that he has good hand speed, it's really that he has an excellent timing and accuracy with his punches. So I think this is going to be the first time and maybe his entire welterweight run that he's going to be in the ring with somebody that's potentially significantly faster when it comes to hand speed, talking about Crawford. And I think that's going to have a market impact on how Spence goes about his offense. Because Spence's offense, when we talk about him going downhill and just overwhelming people, everything starts with his jab. He averages 35 jabs per round. And according to CompuBox, that's good for ninth among active elite fighters. That's fantastic. Uh, but a lot of his offense begins with that. He doubles that jab up. He goes to the body with the jab sometimes to keep people on their heels. And once they get hit with that thudding jab, that's when he can come in with the power shots. That jab almost freezes guys a lot of times and makes them reluctant to throw. But I think with Crawford's faster hands and his timing, he can actually negate that jab. I don't think he'll be able to completely take it away, but I think he'll be able to negate it enough where he's going to make Spence have to fight him more at mid range and possibly on the back foot like he did with Mikey Garcia. And I think at that point, the advantage goes to Crawford. So, what makes me think that? So, when it comes to total punches landed, opponents are averaging about 8 landed punches per round on Spence, which is, excuse me, on Crawford, which is amazing. And that's tied for eighth among active fighters, according to CompuBox. So that's a fantastic percentage. And I think he'll be able to, with his hand speed, he'll be able to counter Spence enough where he's not going to be throwing as many jabs. If he can cut that in half, I think he greatly improves his chances of defeating Spence, which I think he'll be able to do. Especially, I think he's going to be fighting the majority of this fight out of the southpaw stance, and that's going to be risky, of course, because Spence is obviously a southpaw too. But I think uh, Crawford has so much ability out of the southpaw, especially making his right hand the lead hand and being able to jab with Spence and being able to hit Spence with a hard, authoritative jab. I think that's going to be an important tool in having Crawford pull this out. So for the second point, I think Crawford with his faster hands can take away Spence's jab and be able to initiate his offense first and be able to land the harder counters. So my last point, number three. This is a controversial one. We've heard it all. There's really nothing to completely substantiate it, but just my gut is telling me that Spence is not in his physical prime anymore. He looks fantastic, but when you're talking about the crash that he had, the eye injury, that's number one, but it's really just an avalanche of things. Also, he's coming in off a 15-month layoff. I know we've talked about Spence stays in great shape, um, but there's going to be some ring rust. There's no way you can be 15 months out of the ring and then get into the ring with somebody like Terence Crawford and be at your absolute best, especially somebody like Spence who relies so much on physicality and having a great gas tank. So I think there's going to be some rust there that Crawford is going to be able to take advantage of. I don't think Spence is going to be able to just attack him the way he normally does and put the pressure on the way he normally does. I think he's going to have to work his way into the fight, and that's going to work to Crawford's advantage when we're talking about rounds where there might be a lower output and you're going to have to focus on the impact of the punches, who's landing bigger counters, who's kind of controlling the pace, ring generalship. I think some of those early rounds, which we're assuming are going to go to Spence because of his volume, Crawford might be able to steal some of those, so where we have an even fight heading into the middle rounds or the late rounds, as opposed to Crawford having to play catch up. So 15-month layoff, the car crash, the eye injury, and then also the weight cut. Like I mentioned earlier, Spence talked about that, I'm not really trying to stay at 147 anymore. This is going to be my last fight at one welterweight. So I think just the constant cutting of weight for his entire career. He stayed at welterweight his entire career, and he's a big guy, which is amazing to see. It's a testament to his nutrition and all that, but there's only so much that the body can take. So I think a combination of the layoff, the weight cut of trying to get to 147 again at this age, being well over 30 years old, getting to your mid 30s. The car crash, I know they did all the neurological tests and they said nothing is wrong, but there's no way you can tell me that you go through a crash like that and there's not some adverse effects in some type of way. So that, and then this whole idea, Spence does not get hit a lot, but he's been hit with some counters. We know the famous one with Larte, also with Ugas, got stunned a couple times with Garcia. He has good recuperative powers, so he hasn't been in any trouble where he's been close to going down. But I want you guys to focus on that Ugas one. He was actually hurt twice. If you look at the clip, initially before the famous part where the mouthpiece came off, a couple seconds before that, he got hit with a cross and he stumbles back. He almost kind of careens backwards and has to get himself together. And then he gets hit again. I think that's what really did it. It's the fact that he got caught with that same right hand again so quickly. That's what really stunned him. Now, he claims that the reason why he stopped like that, we heard the referee say stop, but he didn't even say it was because of the referee. he said in a recent podcast appearance, I think it was on the Pivot podcast, he said that the reason why he paused like that is because when the mouthpiece came out, he thought his teeth came out too. And that's why he stopped like that. I want you guys to really think about that for a second. I've been ringside for some great fights. One in particular, when somebody's mouthpiece went flying, it was Danny Garcia versus Lucas Matisse in the later rounds. Matisse landed a great shot that sent Garcia's mouthpiece flying out. I've seen fighters lose their mouthpiece before. I've never seen a fighter react like how Spence did. Here's my theory, and it goes to what Spence said. Just think about how hard you have to be stunned to think a punch knocked your teeth out. I want you to think about that for a second. That tells you right there how badly he was buzzed for that one, couple moments. He recovered fine, but I think there's no way he's going to be able to get through this entire fight without getting buzzed like that at least multiple times. And it might not necessarily end in a knockout, even though I think Crawford is going to knock him out late. I do think it's going to happen enough where it's going to change the trajectory of the fight, where it's going to blunt some of Spence's aggression and make it more of a thinking man's fight, which is going to benefit Crawford. And I think the way Crawford has fought southpaws, hasn't doesn't have a lot on his resume. We know the Indago fight, which was a wipeout, and we also know the Felix Diaz fight, which he dominated. The way he dominated Diaz, he threw a lot of southpaw jabs to keep Diaz at bay and punish him from the outside. With Ndongo, he baited him into attacking, leaning forward with the left hand, uh, firing the jab, 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 left hand, and then when Ndongo would throw that combination, he would counter it so well because he was so much faster than Ndongo. And I see a lot of that happening at mid range if he can take away the jab, which I can think he can because of his faster hands, and also all of this together it's just hard for me to see Crawford losing this fight unless he's lost a step. If we see the same Crawford that we've been seeing throughout his welterweight run, I think he has just enough left, and this is just a perfect storm for him to beat Spence. If this was a Spence before all the injuries, the layoff, and everything, I would be more inclined to go with Spence. I would think he'd be fresher and he would be in a position to apply that pressure for 12 rounds. And I think he would just beat Crawford on activity alone. But at this stage, with everything he's going through, I think he slipped just enough for Crawford to get the job done. So just to recap my three reasons. Number one, I don't think Spence is going to be the physically stronger man in there. I think Crawford, number two, is going to have the faster hands and be able to take away Spence's jab. And number three, I don't think Spence is in his physical prime anymore. I think he's had enough wear and tear where Crawford can get him out of there with his stinging punches. So, like I said, Sunday morning, you'll either be coming back saying you nailed it, or you're going to be coming back clowning me saying, big fish handle business. And he had the crawfish boil like he said he was going to do at the weigh in and all the lead up. But we're here. I'm looking forward to a great fight either way. And just think about it. This fight might be a masterpiece, and we may get a sequel in November or December. How great is that? All right, guys. So let me know what you guys think. We're in the final stretch, less than 24 hours. Let me know your takes. There's no right or wrong answers. This is really a 50-50 fight. And I will see you guys Saturday night.